Nickels, 5 cents, or at least that's what the government wants you to think it's worth. Recently, the US government stopped creating pennies because they were just too darn expensive and they didn't even have any real metal inside of it. Besides the metal hyperinflating in price, the cost to make it manufactured is going up. Well, now people are starting to turn their eyes to nickel and nickels. It's been reported that some people are starting to sell assets right now just to buy nickels at 5 cents because the melt value is worth more. So I want to talk to you about that. And I want to talk about a story that came out at the end of September that's really important. And I'm not saying to jump out and run out and buy up all these nickels and spend all your money on nickels. I think that wouldn't be wise. But think about this. If you had something of value in your life, let's say it's a baseball card or a collectible, right? And that baseball card is worth way more than just a bunch of baseball cards you buy at Walmart, the newer ones, right? Or you had a collectible, anything of value compared to the same item but different, right? It wasn't the same year, something like that. Would you just throw that baseball card out in the mix with all the other baseball cards, or that collectible out with all these other collectibles that seem the same but they're different? No, you wouldn't do that because they have value. Well, I think you may want to start holding on to these nickels, just the ones in your spare change. Just set them aside. I'm going to read this story. And before I do, I want to let you know I've got a link down below to a page of all of my courses marked down extremely. If you'd like to take a look at those, that'll be available for you after you watch this video. It came out around September 22nd. And it says that funds are now betting that the price of nickel, not the nickels, have hit rock bottom. It says it's hard to believe that nickel was so wild a couple of years ago. It almost broke the London's metal exchange, which at a certain point, there were so many people vying for nickel after the pandemic for production reasons. It actually just about crushed the LME, okay, the London Metals Exchange. It says most of the year, the London market has done no more than trundle along lethargically at 5-year lows, either side of the 15,000 per metric ton level. So we're talking about the price of nickel, right? It says nickel used in stainless steel and electrical vehicle batteries is in massive oversupply thanks to an Indonesian production boom. The remainder comes daily in the form of LME stock reports. Says the inventory at the LME, both registered and off warrant, has been marching steadily upwards at the 308,000 tons, is now at its highest level since the exchange started publishing off warrant data at the start of 2020. Now, this is where it gets interesting. It says here, so how come investment funds are also steadily building long positions in a bet that prices are set to recover? It says here, investment funds played nickel from the short side last year as the LME price sank even lower. And they were still net short as recently as this last June. There are still plenty of bears among the investment community, but bets on higher prices have been accumulating since mid-April. And it says here, this now represents the strongest bullish engagement since March of 2022. And that's the month when nickel price exploded and the LME suspended trading, since it has all been downhill since then. I believe what you're about to see, because there's a lot of funds out there now betting that the price of nickel has bottomed. And I think on the coattails of the price of gold and silver rising, and especially on the coattail of pennies being pulled out of production in America, I think there's never been a better time just to set some of these aside. Not go out and buy them. There's a big difference. Type 1 if you understand. The ninja saying don't go out and buy nickels as an investment, but if you already have them in your spare change, why wouldn't you just set them aside? Because I believe we are moving into a slight bout of hyperinflation, right? And hyperinflation is actually quite difficult to define, because economists throughout the dawn of time, really have not gotten together and defined hyperinflation as a specific amount of percentage of increase year over year going up. It's just so wild. Yeah, because hyperinflation is affected not only by that specific currency being devalued and prices in that nation state going up, but it's also defined on how that currency is what it's worth versus other currencies. And since there's so many different things happening around the world at any given point, it's hard to peg down when hyperinflation starts and when hyperinflation ends. Well, I believe America is actually moving from a real heavy inflation to a short-lived hyperinflation. And I believe next you're going to see people holding on to these nickels. I think it's important to think differently way ahead of time. The first time I did a penny video to start stashing copper pennies was 3 years ago. And here we are 2 years later, where everyone really started to panic, buying up copper pennies like crazy, because not only was the price of copper rising exponentially, but because the penny was being pulled out of production. Okay, and it's going to be way right out in front of the minds or the eyes of everyone. Well, right now you have the same opportunity, but a little different. You see, a nickel is worth about 6.5 cents, I believe, in melt value. So it's not exponential like 200% greater with a penny, but that's today, based off today's prices. Think about what happens when, if all these funds are right and the price of a nickel or the price of nickel per pound rises exponentially, that's going to start picking up in the headlines for nickels. And I think you're going to start seeing a national nickel shortage. And I think you're going to see at that point the government really step in and go, whoa, we need this for public defense or national defense. And we're going to start creating nickels out of something else and doing blah, 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 all that stuff. And so I think it's a really important time to consider that. I also think it's a really important time to consider financial education, start reading as many books as you can on how to break out of the rat race. Honestly, like, type me if you're in the rat race and you're getting sick and tired of it. You're sick and tired of the same old job, the repetitiveness. And this is coming from a person that has had one of the greatest jobs in the world. I was a firefighter for 23 years. And, but even that, I was just like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a different answer. And so dive into financial education. And some days it starts with something as simple as a penny or a nickel. Just setting something of value aside, going, wait, I see value in this. Why would I give it away in my change when I could just go toss them into a box? And before you know it, let's just say this. What if this is all wrong? I'm totally wrong, right? Well, guess what? You get a big old jar of nickels or a trash can full of nickels. You can always trade them in. They're still worth the exact same face value tomorrow than they are today. But what if I'm right? And all of a sudden, the value, and when I say all of a sudden, a year or two, maybe 3 years from now, the value starts rising, and all of a sudden you see an announcement from the government, hey, we're going to pull these out of circulation. Now, how valuable do these get? You may be in a situation where you're setting aside valuable nickels that are rare that you may want to have slabbed someday, and now you've turned them into a collectible, and the prices just go out of this world. So I want you to consider this today, not running out and buying them, but just take a second to look at them, look at the melt value, go to coinflation.com, check it out, and go, you know what? Why am I giving these away? Because as of right now, a quarter and a normal dime is worth way less. It's worth like 20% of the face value, whereas this is worth more than the face value. So why would you get rid of this? Just the economic ninja is out.